Hi class, in this video we'll be doing the example shampoo sample size. So the brand manager for a brand of shampoo must plan a campaign designed to increase brand recognition. She wants to first determine the percentage of adults who have heard of that brand. How many adults must she survey in order to be 90% confident that her estimate is within 5 percentage points of the true population percentage? And part A wants us to assume that nothing is known about the percentage of adults who have heard of the brand. Part B and C will be on the next slide. Okay, so let's think about what this problem is asking and what information we're given and what information we need to find. So after the first bit of information that the problem gives us, we are then asked, how many adults must she survey? So how many is my keyword to know that I'm looking for a sample size. So how many means I'm looking for sample size, which we're going to call N. And so that's what I'm trying to find. The problem then says she wants to be 90% confident. So that means that my confidence level is 90%. I'm going to convert that to a decimal and say that that's 0.9. And that her estimate needs to be within 5 percentage points of the true population percentage. So when you see wording like that, within blank percentage points, this is a key phrase that you're looking at your margin of error. So my problem has given me E. All right, and it says that that is 5 percentage points. I'm going to convert that to a decimal as 0.05. Okay, so part A wants us then to assume that nothing is known about the current percentage of adults who have heard of the brand. Okay, so let's look at my handy formula chart to see if we can find a formula for the sample size N. All right, so I have my formula chart pulled up. Now, since I'm in 7.1, I am working with the proportion as my parameter. So I'm going to find the P under the parameter column, and then I'm going to use that whole row to find my formulas that I need. Okay, so I find P, and then I look to the right, and all the way at the very right of my table, I see sample size. And so that is the entry that I'm going to need. So notice that for a proportion, my sample size has two formulas it's given me. One is N equals Z alpha over 2 squared times P hat times Q hat divided by E squared. Or we have N equals Z alpha over 2 squared times 0.25 divided by E squared. Okay. Part A, if you remember, says that assume that nothing is known about the percentage of adults who have heard of the brand. This means that P hat is unknown. What that means is for the first problem, I am going to use the second formula, where I'm going to substitute the factor of P hat times Q hat in for 0.025, so since I don't have a P hat. All right. Notice also that I have this critical value of Z alpha over 2 as a factor in my formula for N. So that means I need to find what Z alpha over 2 is. Well, in the problem, it told me that I have a 90% confidence level. Well, thankfully for me, in this very rightmost column off to itself, titled critical value Z-score, I'm given the 90% critical value already down at the bottom of that column. You remember you have 3 values that will be given to you, 90, 95, and 99%. So my 90% Z-score is 1.645. So that's what I'm going to use for that Z alpha over 2. Okay? So let's record all that information. So we know that Z alpha over 2 is 1.645. And then we know my formula for N is Z alpha over 2 squared. And since P hat is unknown, all right, P hat unknown, I'm going to use again that second formula on that formula chart where I'm going to multiply that z alpha over 2 squared by 0.25 and then divide by e squared. Okay, so now I just fill in the information. My z alpha over 2 I said was 1.645 for a 95% confidence level. So that is 1.645 squared times 0.25 and then divided by e, which is 0.05, and then squared. Okay, so when I plug that in the calculator, I get 270.6025. Now my problem tells me to round up to the nearest integer because I can't pull 0.6025 of a person, right? So I want to round up just to make sure I have enough people to properly estimate that population percentage. So I'm always going to round up to 271 people. So she needs to poll 200, or survey rather, 271 people in order to properly estimate her population proportion. In the case that she knows nothing about how many people she thinks have heard of the brand. All right, in other words, p hat unknown. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide to work parts B and C. So part B says that assume that a recent survey suggests about 77% of adults have heard of that brand, and then round up still to the nearest integer. So what this tells me is now that 77% of adults have heard of the brand, this tells me that this is now my p hat. All right, so I'm going to use the decimal, so p hat is 0.77. Okay, so I go back to my formula chart just to kind of refresh myself as to my formulas here. So now I know p hat. So I'm still in that sample size entry for a proportion. And remember we talked that we had two different formulas. So now instead of that second one, I'm going to use the first one that has p hat. So n is going to be z alpha over 2 squared times p hat times q hat divided by e squared. So my z alpha over 2 is going to be the same. My e squared is going to be the same. But now I need p hat and q hat. Okay, so n is z alpha over 2 squared times p hat times q hat and then divided by e squared. Okay, so I know z alpha over 2 from the previous problem. I know e from the previous problem. This problem for part B gives me my new p hat. So I need q hat. So if I'm given p hat, q hat is going to be 1 minus p. So q hat is 1 minus p hat. So that's 1 minus 0.77 or 0.23. Okay, so now I can once again plug everything into my formula for n and just plug that in my calculator and I'm good to go. So my z alpha over 2 is still that 1.645. So that's 1.645 squared times p hat, which is 0.77, times q hat, which is 0.23. And then divided by e squared, which is going to be 0.05 squared. Okay, and then I'm going to plug that in my calculator, and I get 191.69, and I'm going to round that up to 192. Now, no matter what your decimal is, you're going to go ahead and round up to the nearest integer because it's always better to have more people than you need to survey than not to not survey enough people. So I'm always going to round up, no matter what my decimal is. Let me write that a little bit nicer. There we go. So I need 192 people. Okay, so now Part C asks me, does the added knowledge in Part B have much effect on the sample size? Well, it really did. I'm going back to the first slide here. If nothing is known at first, I need to survey quite a few people, 271 people. But when I have that added knowledge that 77% of people already have heard of the brand, that number is reduced quite a bit to 192. That's nearly 100 fewer people that I need to survey. So yes, I need to survey fewer people when more knowledge is known. So yes, I survey fewer people. All right, and you should be good to go for that problem.